don't sit back in your quiet studio and wait for it to come to you. I think that's the sort of burning lesson there, is that you really need to be proactive.
The art world is always changing. It's a dynamic space where creativity and commerce collide. Finding your path and staying true to your craft isn't easy. Welcome to the Professional Artist Podcast. This show explores what it truly takes to build a meaningful and sustainable art career. Each week, we offer intimate deep dives that reveal which art business practices actually work, giving you the inspiration and insight to fuel your artistic journey. I'm your host today, Miguel Mayer, and in this episode, we're diving into the world of Amber Creswell-Bell, an art curator, author, public speaker, and advocate for emerging creatives. As director of emerging art at Michael Reid Galleries for 6 years and founder of the National Emerging Art Prize, Amber has championed underrepresented artists and created platforms to amplify their voices. She is now a faculty expert at the Professional Artists Association, and in this occasion, we're exploring the core principles that define Amber's work and mission. Here's what you'll gain from this deep dive. Championing emerging artists. Strategies she uses to spotlight underrepresented creatives and help them find their voice and audience in a highly competitive art world. Building platforms for growth. Amber provides insights into creating initiatives that empower artists and foster community. Balancing creativity and hustle. Actionable advice on how creatives can successfully navigate the industry while staying true to their vision. All right, let's explore the world of Amber Creswell-Bell. Amber begins by sharing a work of art that has profoundly shaped her perspective and continues to guide the way she experiences art.
I think would be a work by Twombly, which I saw hanging at the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney many years ago. 3 studies from the Temeraire. That was a work he did from 1998 to 1999. And it really ignited something inside of me, which I look to feel whenever I look at artwork now, whether I go to an exhibition or I'm scouting for talent. And I think it's something to do with his really confident visual language, his ability to show chaos and restraint all in one work, and that really unique signature that he had. And it was a work that I still go back and look at to this day. I'm looking to feel that same feeling that I have when I look at the works by Twombly, and in particular that triptych. Is obviously known for his very gestural, abstract mark making, but unusually this triptych piece is quite figurative for him in that it's 3 works of very minimalist scribbles of boats from the Temeraire boats that were used in the England-France wars and eventually was pulled apart and enfranchised. And it was a Turner work that inspired him to then paint his sort of own version, and they ended up being exhibited side by side before they were acquired by the Art Gallery of New South Wales. So there's just something very haunting and very spare about the work and the way he's rendered these ghostly boats, and the way they move across the 3 canvases feels like a passage through time and movement, but it's so restrained. He knows when to put detail in and he knows when to restrain himself. The visual language of this work and all of his work is so distinct that you would recognise a Twombly anywhere you see it. And I think that's what I'm looking for constantly in an artwork, is that I think it's very easy to overpaint a painting. It's really hard to show that discipline and that restraint that really masters.
Next, Amber dives into the crucial steps artists need to take before approaching galleries or curators. She reflects on the common mistakes emerging artists make and shares what it really takes to present your work professionally and thoughtfully.
As the recipient of so many submissions from emerging artists who have wanted to show with me over the years, I think before artists even get to the position where they want to send work to a gallery, there's this really large step that I think the majority of artists forget to do, and that is survey the landscape, survey the industry that they want to work in. And I say this because in any other industry, when you come out of university or college or even work experience, there is an infrastructure to help you on your career. There are recruitment agencies, there are job boards, there are apprenticeships, there are cadetships, all of those sorts of things that provide this framework for an employee to progress through their career. But as an artist, you are a sole trader of sorts. You work for yourself and you are a one-person business. And I think what a lot of emerging artists do is, in a little bit of desperation, they fling themselves at galleries without doing the due diligence to understand the industry and the landscape with which they would like to work. I think sometimes artists will scattergun submissions to as many galleries as they can find email addresses for. But what they forget to do is maybe take time every week to survey the gallery landscape with which they want to work. So it might be in the city they live in, or the state, or the country. And by that, it might be a very unsexy spreadsheet where you're listing out galleries, and then you're listing out the artists that they show, and you're listing out the genres that they specialize in, and the price ranges that they sell, and what their sort of sales turnover is like. And the reason I say this is because you will then implicitly understand where you sit in the market. And I think what artists do is they forget all of that. You couldn't operate as a real estate agent without knowing house prices across the market, et cetera, et cetera. That sort of knowledge is integral. And I think artists think that all they need to do is to do the making and do the painting or make the sculpture, and the rest will happen. But you need to understand where you fit. And then you need to very strategically pick out the gallery that you want to show with and prepare a very professional first impression. I always say check their website to see if they have a submission process, and if they do, adhere to that, because otherwise you will run the risk of annoying them. But then it comes down to galleries are busy, so don't waste their time, get to the point. A really punchy email which acts as your cover letter. And I think a really important part of that first approach to a gallery is to be able to articulate to the gallery why you specifically want to show with them, and speak knowledgeably about what you like of that gallery. It might be that you're a big fan of specific artists that they show. You really like the language that they use when discussing their exhibitions and their artists' practices. Say that up front, and then move on to talking about why you feel you're ready to collaborate with a gallery. And I think you need to use the language of a collaboration, because it very much is a partnership. And then I would attach maybe 5 examples of recent work that is indicative of the direction that your practice is moving in. I think sometimes artists fall into the trap of attaching a whole lot of miscellaneous works, which almost feel like they're produced by a group show of different artists because they're hedging their bets. But as a curator, what I'm looking for is a really strong and consistent visual language, that they have moved past the experimentation phase and they have found the type of work that they're ready to show, and it's consistent, and they can produce a body of work around that. Attach your best work and say you've got a body of work ready to go, or you are a good producer and you produce a lot of works, or you might need 12 months to prepare a body of work, but you're interested to continue the conversation. Be really upfront and honest. And I think that is what a gallery is looking for. So if you can show that you're professional and you understand how to communicate and adhere to deadlines, it is going to impress a gallery and you will get their attention.
Amber reflects on her journey from a corporate career to becoming a curator and advocate for emerging artists. She explains how organizing one successful exhibition set her on a path where she now receives countless submissions from artists every day.
It's a long and meandering journey, but I haven't always been a curator or an arts writer. Once upon a time, I had a very different job. I had a corporate role. I was always interested in the arts, and I always wanted to be a writer in the arts space. But in high school, I received really good HSC results, and well-meaning adults ushered me onto something slightly more academic. So I went on to study psychology, and I went into a very stressful corporate consulting role in the sort of organisational change and human resources space. And so at a very young age, I was travelling and consulting and wearing suits and talking a lot of corporate jargon in boardrooms with a lot of men. And it was a fruitful career, but I hated it in that I just woke up in the morning and thought there has to be more than this. But because I always had this love of writing, I was doing freelance writing for a publication in Melbourne at the time called State of the Arts. So anytime I wasn't traveling for work, I was seeing exhibitions at the institutions, ballet, orchestra, anything to do with the arts. I wasn't getting paid, but I would get free tickets to see all of these events. And I started doing arts reviews several times a week. So while I had this very heavy corporate job, I was doing these arts reviews on the side to just keep that part of my brain alive. And then when I turned 30 in 2007, I just went, I wish that side hustle was my full-time job. So at the end of 2007, I quit my corporate job and I really threw myself into hardcore freelance writing and taking every opportunity to write about art and creatives, architects, artists, designers. And through all of that writing and speaking to a lot of emerging artists, I discovered that there was this whole underbelly of the art world that was being ignored. The landscape at that time was there was the sort of big white box galleries, the very established ones that were looking after very well-known, established artists, but there was no space for emerging artists to show in a sort of gallery context. It was very unusual. So I just took it upon myself one time to curate an exhibition of all of the emerging artists that I had come across in my recent writing and put them together in a group show and see how it went. And that would have been in 2015. A few years of writing under my belt. I really didn't know the rules of curating at this point. I didn't have any particular curation or art history academics behind me, but I had a lot of passion and a lot of contacts. So I put on this exhibition and it was such a huge success. There were queues to get in. The media really seized on it. The street press went viral on social media, all quite accidentally, lit nothing by, I guess, my own enthusiasm and not much more. And I thought that was fun. I might do that again. And really from that moment on, it was a one show, a two show that grew into a show a month, and then it was a show every few weeks. So from that moment, I really did become the recipient of a lot of artists seeing that I was championing emerging artists where other galleries were not. So from 2016 till now, I am receiving submissions and expressions of interest from artists every single day, by the dozen.
Bridging the gap between emerging artists and the wider public has always been at the heart of Umber's approach. She talks about how she intentionally made her exhibitions accessible and inviting, featuring diverse artists and underrepresented mediums, which contributed to her exhibition success.
I think from the get-go, I wanted to make art accessible to everyone, and that has always been my principle. I feel like the galleries had long time been gatekeepers to the art world, and I really wanted to demystify that whole process and really make art accessible and art fun and art lively. So I think that was the way I promoted it. That was the language I used. I picked artists that were really diverse and eclectic. I included ceramicists, which is the norm now, but at the time, ceramicists were a very undernourished corner of the creative world. So I had this big gallery space with art, ceramics and plants, and I made it really accessible and inviting and homely. And I think that sort of festival vibe, and everyone's invited and come along, bring your kids, bring your dog, and being very transparent and enthusiastic about it was contagious in a way. And because it was so different and it wasn't rarefied and exclusive like many of the galleries at the time presented themselves to be, I was the antithesis of that, and I was making it very open and democratic and affordable.
For artists without a gallery, Umber suggests creating your own opportunities. She emphasizes taking initiative, thinking creatively, and bringing your work directly to the audience.
I do a lot of artist mentoring, and the big goal is they want to show with a gallery. And sometimes that takes time. And then the next question is, what do I do in the meantime? And I'm a big advocate of artists producing their own exhibition. So find an empty shop space that might be sitting there and see if you can rent that for a week or two and do a pop-up exhibition. Or maybe find some peers that you all live in the same area and there's an affinity between you and your work, and put together a group show. I think that's really important in understanding the rigor of what goes on behind an exhibition, what it's like to curate a body of work between you, what it's like to install a show, to manage a space, to handle sales, to produce a price list, to produce a catalogue, to speak with collectors as they come into the space. You might build a community online with people, other artists that you like from Instagram. And I always say a good suggestion would be, say there's 5 of you that regularly chat on Instagram and you admire each other's practices and none of you have a gallery that you're attached to. What you can do is create this sort of virtual pop-up show in that you all promote that on a certain date and time, you're going to publish new works that are available, all of the artists at the same time, simultaneously, coordinated by time and unified by a hashtag. And it becomes like an online art bazaar where you can cash in on other artists' audiences and find new people who might never have heard of your work, or cross-pollinate, and there's a little bit of a buzz because of the shared energy of artists coming together and promoting their work. So I think sometimes you have to think outside the square, and showing with a gallery in a gallery space with a curator is not always the end all. There is other ways to get out there and show your work. And I think be a bit of a guerrilla artist, find unused spaces, hire galleries, show in your studio. Sometimes artists have put on pop-up exhibitions in their homes over a weekend with other artists and invite people to come through and see them in a home situation. Use your initiative and think of new ways to get your work in front of people. The art market doesn't always come to you. Sometimes you need to bring your art to the art market.
There were 2 pivotal moments that shaped her career. Both experiences taught Amber the importance of pushing past comfort zones and helped define her path in the art world.
I think definitely curating that first show for myself with no experience and no permission really unlocked a whole new world for me. I think second to that would have been after a couple of years of curating exhibitions quite regularly. I was visited at one of my exhibitions by Michael Reid, who's one of Australia's preeminent gallerists, owner of multiple galleries, who came into one of my exhibitions and said, "I want your magpie eye working for me." And I ended up working for him for 6 years until just very recently, and being one of his gallery directors across 5 galleries in Australia and Berlin. So I think that pushing myself past my comfort zone and giving myself permission to curate, and only a short number of years later becoming a director of one of the biggest gallery groups in Australia, was certainly a pivotal point in my career in terms of not feeling like I needed permission anymore. And it was in my time with Michael Reid that I established the National Emerging Art Prize in 2021. And that was an idea I had, but when I spoke it out loud to Michael Reid, he was the biggest supporter of that idea and really helped me to make that happen. We're in our 5th year now, and it has been such a huge and monumental success, and it really is showcasing how I feel about championing emerging art talent. It was inspired by the fact that a lot of emerging artists that I had met had won art prizes and had been awarded large sums of money, but in terms of their career, absolutely nothing happened. They were a finalist in an art prize, they won a sum of, say, $25,000, and then it was a huge anticlimax because nothing happened after that to benefit their career. And I suggested to Michael Reid, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was an art prize that not only awarded a large sum of money, but also gave an artist a genuine foothold into a career in the arts? They got an exhibition, they got art mentoring, they got the expensive inputs of an exhibition covered, such as art transport, framing, flights to the exhibition if they live in a different state, all as part of the one prize. And he said, yeah, let's do that. And that's what we did. And it has been a huge success. And I think in the first year I was expecting maybe 300 entries and we got 1,500. And it's grown every year since then. So it has been a really large and successful art prize and has stayed true to what my intentions were from the beginning.
Before receiving a career-changing offer, she faced obstacles familiar to anyone in the art world. From last-minute artist withdrawals to losing a planned solo show to a larger gallery, Those experiences taught her the value of professionalism and reliability, qualities that she now sees as essential when selecting artists.
I didn't have too many things go wrong, I must admit, but sometimes there would be cases where the exhibition is about to show in a few days' time and an artist is just not ready, or the work that they've produced is different to what I was expecting, or they've decided to pull out for whatever reasons. I had a solo show for an artist who I'd been nurturing for quite some time, and just when I was about to put their solo show on, they were tapped on the shoulder by one of the big galleries and offered representation. And the condition of that was that they were not able to proceed with the exhibition with me. So I suddenly found myself in a situation where I had a space that I'd hired and I was paying rent for, and I was all geared up, and I had been promoting an exhibition that suddenly I then had to pivot and find another artist at short notice. So there's some of the challenges that I've overcome, but that's, I think, taught me that one of the things I look for in artists is that real core of professionalism. I can't deal with unreliable, dizzy artists who feel flaky. I really need to know that the artist is invested. They understand the opportunity that's being offered. They adhere to deadlines and deliverables and dates and all of those sorts of things, which are so integral when you're putting on an event like an exhibition.
She never planned to write books, but after a publisher discovered her early exhibitions, Amber said yes to an unexpected book deal. That first success led to 7 more, each aiming to make art accessible by sharing the stories of both established and emerging artists.
I think as somebody who had always been a writer, and I was, even from a young age, constantly entering writing competitions and all of that sort of thing, and I was a school newspaper editor, never did I have writing a book on my bucket list. I thought that was well beyond my capabilities, or that's something that other people achieve. And I was really fortunate in, not long after I curated those first couple of exhibitions, well received by social media and press, that Thames and Hudson, my publisher, actually reached out to me, I think through Instagram, and invited me for a coffee. And I thought that they were going to ask me to perhaps introduce them to somebody that I worked with, or perhaps an artist that I'd worked with. But instead they offered me straight off the bat a book deal, which I couldn't believe. And it was very daunting because I just didn't know if I was equipped to write a book. I'd just found out that I was pregnant with my 3rd child, and the book and the baby were essentially going to be due in the same week. But I said yes anyway, and I did write that book, and I absolutely loved the process. And that book went on to be a huge seller internationally. So off the back of that, they said, what would you like to write next? And that has been the way it's been for the last 7 books. Every time I submit a book, they ask me what I want to do next. So I've been really fortunate in that I have found a niche in publishing and an audience that it resonates with. And I think much like my exhibitions have sought to break down the walls of galleries and make art accessible to a wider audience, I've done the same with my books. I think that there's a whole market of people out there who are intimidated by the art world and intimidated by art speak and would love to go into a gallery, but they have a deep fear of embarrassing themselves or saying the wrong thing or not understanding the right questions to ask about art. From the very beginning, I've really sought to make my books about art in depth, but written in friendly, non-academic language, telling the stories of artists and looking a little bit more in depth into art, usually by genre. I usually write books about a genre, including 40 or 50 artists. Each artist gets their own chapter where I explore still life or abstract or landscapes or portraits or whatever the subject might be. I'm always looking, so you never know where I'll find you. I think people have cottoned on to the fact that being in one of my books is a good promotional opportunity. So I now receive submissions from artists and galleries requesting to be considered for my forthcoming books. But that's not how I work. Just like my exhibitions, the books are curated by me. But I don't want them to be elitist in that they're the best in show artists. I like it to be a cross-section of what's happening in the art space, from the very accomplished artists through to emerging. I think it's really important to include the stories and the practices of emerging artists in these books that offer a cross-section into a given subject. I feel like when I have an idea to write a book, those artists seem to just slip into my vision, whether it be on social media or I go to an exhibition or I go to an art show or they're a finalist in an art prize or I meet them at an opening and I'm just chatting to them casually and they tell me about their practice and it sparks an idea for a book or they're a good fit for a book I'm writing. It is a really mixed bag, no formal approach to it, but I gather as many artist names that I think would be good for a book. And again, on my spreadsheet, I might list them out and just make sure I've got a good spread of gender, backgrounds, ages, geographical spread, all of those sorts of things. That's how I approach it.
How do you see the role of art books and publishing in general evolving today, especially in contrast to digital channels?
I think a lot of people said that online and websites and social media was going to be the death of books, but I actually think it's quite the opposite. And I think that anyone who is a regular user of social media understands the exhaustion that one feels when we're scrolling and that deluge of visual stimuli and that those micro sound bites of visual imagery that we're seeing. And I think that people are now turning to books as a sort of reprieve from that visual noise where they can sit with something quietly. And I think when you're looking at a book, it's very hard to do other things. And on social media, you could potentially look at 50 artists in a minute and a half. But when you're looking at the book, your focus is just calmly on the process of turning the page and reading more in depth than you might find in a caption. It's tactile. There's the feeling of the book, the crack of the spine of a new book when you open it, the smell of the paper. It becomes an object. It becomes an archive of artwork that is very accessible and affordable to everyone. You might not have the money to go and buy an original piece of art, but you can certainly buy a book that is curated and is holding beautiful imagery and information that you can own, and it's something that you proudly put in your bookshelf or on your coffee table and reread and dip into over and over.
In today's digital landscape, Amber believes the trap many artists fall into is confusing content creation with art. She believes social media should support, not overshadow, the seriousness of one's practice.
I think that sometimes emerging artists fall into the trap of thinking that they are content creators instead of artists. I think you have to stand true in the fact that first and foremost, you are an artist. And secondarily, you're using the platforms of social media to promote your art practice. I think a lot of artists focus too much on creating reels and dancing in their studios and singing songs and finding the right soundtrack to put to their reel and all of that sort of thing. And I think at the end of the day, that probably says to me as a curator that they're not taking their practice as seriously as perhaps they should, and they're more interested in getting likes and traction on social media. So I think that in the absence of having a gallery who is communicating an audience and educating an audience about you and your practice, you need to be resourceful and use your own means to do that. And by doing so, a smart looking website and a social media platform is an excellent way to do it for almost no money. Use your social media to allow collectors to understand not only what your art looks like, but a little bit about your practice, a little bit about what inspires you, a little bit about what goes on in your studio. Allow collectors to come along on the journey with you, because collectors, once they're on board with you, are quite loyal. So if you're allowing them little glimpses into your studio, sharing little bits about you and your work, you will find that they become quite loyal and are invested in watching you grow and purchasing your work, because by owning a little bit of your work, it's owning a little bit of what they've been following along. So I think it is important to do that, but you don't have to be a slave to social media. In terms of finding artists, I am always looking on social media, of course, but I'm always looking in art prizes. I love looking at who's the finalist in the various art prizes across Australia and across the world. I love going to graduate exhibitions at the art schools. I love seeing artist studios when there's an artist trail where you can go from studio to studio and having a look at different artists in a locale. There's no end to where you can find artists. They're everywhere. And I think a good curator is keeping their radar open at all times.
Amber shares that becoming a valued gallery partner takes more than a single exhibition. Being proactive, open to feedback, and consistently engaged helps artists turn opportunities into long-term collaborations.
I think if you do your homework up front and you do zero in on a gallery for the right reasons, and then you are lucky enough to have an exhibition opportunity with them, I think that openness and communication is key. Ask for feedback and don't be precious. Be prepared to listen to difficult feedback and take that on board. Some of the artists that I've worked with, even before Michael Reid days, that I've taken right through, it's the artists who are open to feedback. Those are the ones who I feel like have been able to secure those exhibition opportunities that have grown into representation. Ask, what opportunities are there beyond this? Are there group shows? Is there an opportunity to have another solo show? I think sometimes you don't ask, you don't get, because galleries are working with lots of artists with competing interests. And I think sometimes those ones who jump up and down the loudest or show the most motivation and enthusiasm possibly get the attention. Don't sit back in your quiet studio and wait for it to come to you. I think that's the sort of burning lesson there, is that you really need to be proactive.
As we approach the end of our conversation today, Amber, what gives you hope about the future of artists in Australia or globally?
I think despite all of the technological and AI type developments that are going on in the world, art has stayed true to form and it continues to surprise and delight me. Whilst ever there are humans with human concerns and human feelings and human questions, there is a place for art, and there is no shortage of creativity and originality that I'm seeing out there. And while I feel like sometimes we're seeing more art than we ever did all at once, the good art really cuts through, and I think that that's really encouraging to know that there's no end to that well.
Amber Creswell-Bell's journey shows how championing others can create lasting impact in the art world. By combining her passion for emerging talent with her curatorial vision, she's built platforms that amplify unrepresented voices and connect artists with audiences. Her story is a testament to the power of vision, persistence, and advocacy. Through the National Emerging Art Prize and her dedication to mentoring artists at the Professional Artists Association, Amber proves that authentic, purposeful support helps creativity thrive. This podcast grows because people like you share it. So if you got value today, if it inspired you to think differently or take action, hit follow or subscribe and send it to one person who needs to hear it. That's how we keep making more episodes. Thank you for listening to the Professional Artist Podcast. And until next time.